Whole30 recently made a pretty shocking announcement, and that is that all seed oils are now included in their program. They said the reason for this rule change is because, quote, the science of seed oils has changed over the years and seed oils are healthy. They also said that they want the program to be less restrictive, more Whole30 accessible, inclusive, and effective, and that they've decided to widen the scope of what foods and ingredients are permitted as Whole30 approved. While there's a lot that the Whole30 and I have in common around our dietary approach, like getting people to just eat more real whole foods, I believe they got this conversation around seed oils completely wrong. So I reached out to the team at Whole30 and asked them to send me all the science on this topic surrounding seed oils and why they made this decision. And I spent the entire past month breaking this down, all this data, and what you're about to learn today is really going to surprise you. You're going to learn why seed oils are not the health food that Whole30 claims they are, as the science suggests. And in the long run, you're also going to learn why seed oils can lead to a host of health complications. Now, before we jump into the science, I find it pretty ironic that Whole30, that encourages more whole foods, is allowing an ingredient that is the exact definition of an ultra-processed food. Seed oils are probably as ultra-processed as you can get. It requires about 30 to 40 different stages of processing, taking industrialized processed grains and seeds and turning that into an oil. It takes dozens of cups of corn just to create a couple tablespoons of corn oil. The same thing with sunflower seeds, the same thing with the rapeseed that's going to produce canola oil. Even Whole30 has an FAQ acknowledging that seed oils are an ultra-processed food. If you've ever seen how seed oils are created, it has to go through about 30 to 40 different stages of processing, including bleaching, degumming, deodorizing, and using harsh chemical solvents like hexane, which Whole30 here basically pushes to the side, saying that these actually are a heart-healthy oil because it's going to lower your inflammation, it's going to lower your LDL, and the high-quality science shows that seed oils are actually beneficial. But we are going to break all that down today, so when you're ready, let's jump into this science. Now, Whole30 sent me this landing page basically laying out their reasoning behind the switch to using seed oils and all of the science that they sifted through to come to their conclusion. But I found it interesting in this landing page that they said, quote, you'll still find medical doctors, dietitians, and wellness influencers touting the toxic and inflammatory health effects of seed oils. And then they go on to say that they've evolved out of this thinking because the science itself has changed. This makes it appear that those of us that are trying to talk about the very real negative health effects of seed oils because they are toxic and they are inflammatory in ways that Whole30 is not looking at, they make it appear as though those of us that are still talking about the dangers of seed oils are somehow unevolved and that we haven't updated with the science. Now, their first argument here in their report that seed oils are healthy is they say, quote, based on this huge body of high quality research they sifted through, it's clear that the evidence is quite one-sided in favor of PUFA-rich oils. This is polyunsaturated fatty acids. There is almost universal agreement between studies that substituting PUFAs in place of saturated fat in the diet reduces heart disease risk significantly. This means if you swap out your butter, tallow, ghee, and replace that with canola, corn, cottonseed, sunflower, and soybean oils, then your heart disease risk is going to go down. I find it kind of odd that they use the terms one-sided and that the collective universal agreement is that seed oils are healthier than saturated animal fats. Because since 2009 alone, there have been 16 reviews of hundreds of randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials can show cause and effect, looking at saturated fat, seed oils, and heart disease. Every single one of these reviews has found that when you replace saturated animal fats with seed oils, it does not reduce your risk for mortality or cardiovascular disease. And I want to go over just 3 of those 16 right now. This first one is a review of 17 systematic analyses of clinical trial data published in BMJ Evidence-Based Medicine. And authors concluded this review by saying, quote, diets that replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat do not convincingly reduce cardiovascular events or mortality. Another review of 19 meta-analyses published in Nutrition Reviews concluded by saying, quote, meta-analyses of observational studies found no association between saturated fatty acid intake and heart disease, while meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials were inconsistent but tended to show a lack of association. Or this third study, published in the Nutrition Journal titled, quote, the effect of replacing saturated fat with mostly omega-6 polyunsaturated fat on coronary heart disease, a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. Authors concluded this by saying, quote, available evidence from adequately controlled randomized controlled trials suggests replacing saturated fatty acids with mostly omega-6 PUFA is unlikely to reduce coronary heart disease events, coronary heart disease mortality, or total mortality. Again, that is just 3 of the 16 reviews that have been done since 2009, and they have all found that when you replace saturated animal fats with seed oils, there is no benefit. Now, the second piece of evidence that the Whole30 team presented was that seed oils lower total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. They proceeded to show data from 7 different studies. 5 of these studies showed seed oils lower total and LDL cholesterol better than butter and other animal fats. And 2 studies showed that the fatty acids commonly found in seed oils like linoleic acid and arachidonic acid aren't inflammatory. We're going to talk more about these 2 studies and inflammation in a little bit to come, but let's look at these first 5 studies that showed seed oils lower total and LDL cholesterol more than animal fats like butter. These 5 studies they presented, these are high quality studies. These are meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials. This is the gold standard of scientific research. This can prove cause and effect. Well, here's the issue that I have with these. These studies did not look at what actually matters, heart disease and death. Because at the end of the day, people don't care what their cholesterol numbers are. They don't care what their LDL numbers are. What they actually care about is death. What they care about is having a heart attack. They care about living a high quality of life. You can live your whole life with high total cholesterol, with high LDL, and never once suffer a heart attack, and never once die an early death. If you live your whole life, high quality life, with high total cholesterol, high LDL, then what does it matter if your LDL is elevated or your total cholesterol is elevated? So all these meta-analyses showed is that seed oils lower total and LDL cholesterol and improve other biomarkers. So then we asked the question, does lower LDL and lower total cholesterol actually mean that you are going to have less heart disease and have a less chance of dying from all-cause mortality long term? That's what the team at Whole30 then went on to address. They listed 2 more meta-analyses of observational studies. This can show association. It can't show cause and effect. That when you consume more linoleic acid from seed oils, that you have less risk of dying from cardiovascular disease, all-cause mortality, coronary heart disease, and even cancer. So when you consume more seed oils, you have less risk of dying from all these things. But these 2 large meta-analyses that they used to prove their point, what was the funding of these 2 studies? In the first study, the funding was provided by Unilever. Unilever is the biggest seller of soybean oil in the entire world. And the second study was funded by the American Diabetes Association. And when you look at who funds the American Diabetes Association, you're going to see Big Food and Big Pharma. Big Food uses a ton of seed oils in their products, and Big Pharma sells a lot of statins, and in order for statins to sell and be beneficial, LDL needs to be high and LDL needs to be the culprit. So right there, the 2 meta-analyses that they showed that seed oils are beneficial were directly funded basically by seed oil manufacturers. All right, so now we ask the question, is there actually science? Is there high quality science out there showing that if you have elevated LDL, elevated total cholesterol, that you actually have less risk of dying from cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality? You bet there is. We're going to breeze through 5 high-quality studies that the Whole30 team could have looked at and could have put in their report, but they chose not to. The first one is a 2016 systematic review published in the British Medical Journal, where researchers looked at data from 30 different studies involving more than 68,000 older adults, and they concluded by saying, quote, high LDL-C is inversely associated with mortality in most people over 60 years old. This finding is inconsistent with the cholesterol hypothesis that cholesterol, particularly LDL-C, is inherently atherogenic. The second one, this is the largest cohort study ever conducted on this subject. Researchers analyzed data from more than 118,000 individuals for more than 8 years, and they found that those who had the highest LDL-C levels lived longer than those who received statin treatment. Or this third study, published in the Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism, researchers found that high LDL-C is not a significant risk factor for women of any age. Now, this fourth study is where it gets pretty wild. Published in the American Heart Journal, researchers looked at data from nearly 137,000 patients hospitalized with a heart attack. They found that nearly 75% of them had LDL levels within healthy and normal range. How can elevated LDL be the culprit behind heart disease, behind a heart attack, when 75% of the people in this study had healthy and low LDL levels? Well, I'm going to answer that question in just a short time to come. And now we're going to look at the fifth and final study where researchers looked at the LDL of 517 patients hospitalized with a heart attack. Half of them had normal, healthy LDL levels, and the other half had high LDL levels. After following these patients for more than 3 years, researchers found that the patients admitted with low, healthy LDL died more from all-cause mortality compared to the patients with high LDL. The researchers even went on to say that the higher all-cause mortality persisted even after adjusted for confounding variables. The data is really all over the place. People die with low LDL, people die with high LDL, people die with low cholesterol, people die from heart attacks with high cholesterol. So then you might be thinking, if you've heard of this topic before, you might be thinking, is inflammation the culprit? Well, do seed oils cause inflammation? Do they lower inflammation? That's what we're going to talk about next. According to Whole30, they've mentioned multiple times throughout this report that seed oils are not inflammatory, and they go on to cite a few different reviews. The first review they listed on this topic of seed oils not being inflammatory was a review of 30 randomized clinical trials, and that found that seed oils are not inflammatory. Well, I dug into this research, and what Whole30 team failed to mention about this review is that the authors of this study concluded by saying the extent of change in dietary linoleic acid intake might affect CRP levels, meaning the more linoleic acid you intake over time can actually make your CRP levels go up. This is C-reactive protein, and this is a marker of inflammation in the body. We're going to talk more about linoleic acid to come. They cited one more review on this topic of inflammation, and they found that another 14 studies did not find arachidonic acid, this is an omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid, to be inflammatory. And they go on to say, which is the entire premise of the whole, quote, seed oils are unhealthy argument. The problem with this review of these 14 studies that they cited, when you go in and actually look at those 14 studies, the researchers didn't use seed oils as their source of arachidonic acid. They used arachidonic acid supplementation. That is completely different than using an entirely oxidized and rancid seed oil in your diet. This is just arachidonic acid supplementation. So after spending the past month reviewing all of Whole30's data, it's clear they only looked at seed oils through a very narrow perspective. They only looked at it through the lens of LDL and inflammation. And this might surprise you, but this is the wrong place that we should be looking. This is how mainstream professionals have been looking at heart disease and seed oils for the past 50 years. Seed oils are problematic for reasons not mentioned here in the Whole30 report. This is something that mainstream professionals really often overlook. They get so hyper-focused on LDL, total cholesterol, and heart disease. But there's so much more to it than that, and that's what I want to break down now. One of the major issues with seed oils is the fact that they create many toxic byproducts when we break them down in our human body. Because seed oils are mostly rich in PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, mainly linoleic acid, they easily incorporate themselves into our cell membranes because we are a monogastric species. We have one stomach. We don't have the proper enzymes to be able to detoxify from excess linoleic acid. Like a ruminant animal, cow or bison, they are able to detoxify that from their body. Humans, we just accumulate linoleic acid in our bodies. While we need a certain amount of linoleic acid from our diet because we can't make it, we are getting way too much in our diets nowadays. 100 years ago, we were eating mostly animal fats and a few plant fats like olive oil and other minimally processed fruit oils. But now we are eating 80% of our fat calories coming from seed oils, and over 20, maybe 30% of our total calories are now coming from seed oils. Now, the problem with eating too much linoleic acid from seed oils, because our bodies can't eliminate it or detoxify from it, we produce a lot of toxic byproducts called oxidized linoleic acid metabolites, or oxalums. And the science has never been more clear on this. These metabolites are more inflammatory than linoleic acid itself. And all these metabolites that I'm going to throw up on the screen right here have been shown to be more problematic than linoleic acid and lead to a host of health conditions. These toxic metabolites of linoleic acid are 20 times more abundant in the LDL of patients with atherosclerosis compared to controls. But not only heart disease, these metabolites are also associated with many other health conditions like chronic pain, Alzheimer's, fatty liver disease, autoimmune conditions, and cataracts. This is not something that the Whole30 report even talked about once. Now, the next problem with eating too much linoleic acid in our diet is that this leads to oxidized LDL. Sure, seed oils might help to lower your LDL like we just talked about, but they're going to oxidize it. And this is the major issue. The Whole30 team didn't look at any of these studies, at least that wasn't included in their report, because inflammation and oxidation are two different things. Even Whole30 acknowledges that eating seed oils can create oxidized LDL and oxidized cholesterol. They said, quote, various studies have suggested that seed oils with high levels of PUFAs promote chronic disease like coronary heart disease via oxidative stress, oxidized LDL cholesterol, and chronic low-grade inflammation. To reiterate this point that excessive linoleic acid in the human diet from seed oils leads to oxidized LDL, there was a 2017 study where researchers examined LDL cholesterol in men with coronary artery disease compared to a control group of men without coronary artery disease. What they found was truly shocking. They found that the men with coronary artery disease had a significantly different LDL cholesterol composition, which included higher levels of linoleic acid and arachidonic acid. Their cholesterol was also significantly more oxidized, which means it's structurally damaged, which the study authors concluded by saying that it's due to the linoleic acid content. This study shows that individuals that have heart disease, a heart attack, or other cardiovascular issues, their LDL is structured differently. It's damaged, it's hurt. Whereas if you have healthy LDL, if you are eating stable fats from animal fats that don't oxidize, animal fats like butter, ghee, tallow, lard, these don't easily oxidize. These are more structurally stable. They will not cause a ton of oxidation, if any, inside the human body. Unfortunately, mainstream health professionals and this Whole30 team is still focused on the older narrative of looking at heart disease through just a very narrow lens, that lower LDL, lower total cholesterol is going to reduce your risk for chronic disease. But it doesn't matter how low your LDL goes if it's being oxidized by seed oils and linoleic acid metabolites, then you're still at a large risk of cardiovascular issues and other issues. But the newer research suggests that the amount of oxidized LDL is a much better predictor of cardiovascular problems. And what's more, even newer research published just a few years ago found that atherosclerosis might not even be possible without oxidized LDL cholesterol. This might be the exact reason why we saw earlier in the video 75% of patients that had a heart attack had low LDL because their cholesterol might have been oxidized. The goal should not be to lower your LDL as much as possible. The goal should be to keep your LDL and your cholesterol from becoming oxidized. And how do you do that? You eat more whole foods and more healthy fats that are saturated, that are going to be stable, that aren't going to oxidize when you cook them, like tallow, lard, butter, and ghee. And now the very last reason that seed oils are problematic in this video is that seed oils create inflammatory body fat. Now, Whole30 laid out a few studies suggesting why arachidonic acid and linoleic acid aren't inflammatory on biomarkers like CRP, which we discussed is not true. Also, other inflammatory biomarkers. But the real inflammation is inside the body fat, because the fat that we eat actually creates our cell membranes. When you're looking at my skin, when you see body fat, this is created out of fat. Your cell membranes are created out of the types of fats that you eat. And if you're going to eat a bunch of polyunsaturated fatty acids from seed oils, your cells become floppy, the hormonal signaling doesn't work as well. But if you're going to eat saturated fats, your cells are going to be a little bit more stiff, they're going to be more rigid, and it's going to allow better communication between hormones. But what's the ideal structure of human body fat? Recent research on hunter-gatherer culture suggests that humans' body fat should be made up of between 1.5% and at most 3% polyunsaturated fatty acids. And 97% of our cells should be a mixture of saturated and monounsaturated fatty acids. But compare that to today, the average American's body fat makeup is over 30% polyunsaturated fatty acids. It should be no more than 3%. But what happens when you include 10% more of something in a recipe? Well, the evidence is clear. The more PUFA you have in your body fat, the more inflammatory cytokines are produced. Even skinny people can have fat body fat. That might sound odd, but even skinny people can have high amounts of PUFA in their body fat. And this leads to a host of issues, as the studies suggest. These inflammatory cytokines that are produced from PUFA-rich body fat cause a host of issues in the body, and this might not show up on blood tests when you're looking at CRP levels, when you're looking at other inflammatory biomarkers, because inflammatory cytokines can cause a host of issues, and that is not something that mainstream professionals are looking at. And this is the major problem that I have with Whole30's recommendations. Yes, they're advocating for eating more whole foods. That's what I'm advocating for. But they are suggesting that you can eat seed oils with your home cooked meals, and it's going to reduce your risk of getting heart disease, which we just talked about, and that is not true according to the science. But if you are still eating a majority of your fats from rancid polyunsaturated fatty acids, you will be creating your body fat mostly out of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Long term, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, you're creating a lot of inflammatory cytokines, inflammatory body fat, and this is not good. Now, as I wrap up this video, our goals are similar. Our goals are to help people eat more whole foods in general. Just like I want people to eat more whole foods, so does Whole30. And they say you can continue to eat your ghee, your tallow, your butter. Those things are all permitted on the Whole30 plan. But what I have an issue with is that they are saying seed oils are healthy, and this is misguided. And they've said if the worst thing that you're eating is seed oils with your whole foods, it's still a win. I don't agree with that. Because if you're eating a home cooked meal, that is a win. But if you are bringing in seed oils that are highly susceptible to oxidation, air, light, and heat, and you are already cooking with those oils, and you begin cooking, because that's how a majority of people are going to use seed oils in their home for home cooked meals, is by heating them up, is by cooking them. And when you cook with seed oils and you heat them up, they become rancid, oxidized, produce trans fats, and create a lot more issues inside the body. While the goal is never to be perfect, and the goal should not be to avoid seed oils all of the time, it's really honestly not possible to avoid them in our world today because we've made them so prevalent in our world the past 100 years. The goal is to be more mindful. And I don't believe, according to this science, that eating seed oils regularly long term is going to lead to beneficial health outcomes. So at the end of the day, the choice is ultimately yours. And I just wanted to be able to break down this data because there's a lot of conflicting evidence out there. And I wanted to be able to break this down in such a way that helps you to be more informed so that way you can go out there and make more accurate decisions based off all the data at hand. So I appreciate you being here. If you like this content, be sure to leave a comment, a question, like this video, subscribe, because we have a lot of incredible content coming your way just like this. Be sure to send this video out to somebody that you know likes this topic about seed oils the most, and I'll talk to you next time.